Moments away from Vice President Kamala Harris's concession speech at Howard University. We'll bring you her remarks live as soon as she takes the stage. It is, of course, not the history she had hoped to make, but it will be an important message to the country and to everyone who fought alongside Vice President Kamala Harris in this unique and unprecedented and deeply abridged contest for president. In a race whose contours are still being unearthed, the people of this country spoke clearly and across every part of our nation about their deep dissatisfaction with the status quo. At this hour, Donald Trump has won 291 electoral votes and at least 71 million votes. An historic realignment potentially underway, an unprecedented rejection of an urgent bipartisan plea for decency, democracy, and access to women's health care. But as in 2016, when in the ashes of Hillary Clinton's cracked glass ceiling speech, the winning Biden coalition began to assemble itself, listen closely today to the stirrings of a new coalition, willing to listen to what voters had to say last night and prepare to fight for our democracy anew. Unlike 8 years ago, the threat Donald Trump poses to our institutions is a feature of this third campaign for the president and something people in every corner of civil society must rumble with today. New York Times puts it like this today, quote, "America stands on the precipice of an authoritarian style of governance never seen in its 248-year history. After defeating Vice President Kamala Harris, who would have become the first female U.S. president, Trump will bring his own historic first into the White House. The only president convicted of dozens of crimes, accused of dozens more, and twice impeached. He will begin his second term bound by few political norms after a campaign in which he seemed to defy everyone." That is where we start today with some of our most favorite experts and friends. Here with me at the table, Joy Reid, host of The Readout right here on MSNBC, my wing woman into the hours last night. My other wing woman, former U.S. Senator, host of MSNBC's How to Win 2024 podcast, Claire McCaskill. My dear friend, chief political columnist, host of the podcast In Politic for Puck, MSNBC national affairs analyst, John Heilman's here. I'm going to apologize in advance for any interruptions because as soon as the vice president takes the stage, we'll go right to her. But your thoughts today?
So, I think one of the things that is the least helpful and that I've sort of started to hear the stirrings of out there are the dissection of the Kamala Harris campaign. Because I think it's clear from the results that when you look at the states that she won, we just saw Washington State where she won handily in the places and the constituencies that she won. People who were more secular, black women overwhelmingly, all but 20% of black men. Black men ticked up 1% from the last time that the same percentage voted for Donald Trump. That's not a change. The places where she made inroads, slight inroads among college-educated white women who went a little bit more her way. It's clear that given the fact that he won the popular vote, which is something that hasn't happened since your former boss in 2004, there's nothing that Kamala Harris could have done. There's no other sort of tweaks to her investment strategy of her billion-dollar campaign that was picture perfect in almost every way, but for a few things you could quibble with. The not allowing the uncommitted folks to speak at the convention will be looked at as maybe that could have helped her in Michigan had she embraced, Palestinian rights supporters more. But there is no tweak that she could have done that would have stopped her from being a black woman. And we know that this country has had a history of not supporting the freedom and rights of women, and even some women not supporting the freedom and rights of women broadly at the national level. And we know that this country has a deep history of anti-blackness. And when you look at the two constituencies that went hardest, that swung hardest for Trump, it was white men who we knew that's how they were going to vote. It was white women who still voted despite the deep and open disrespect shown to them by Donald Trump and especially by J.D. Vance. And it was Latino men who swung hard toward Donald Trump. And so I think what we've seen is we had essentially an Argentina election where you also had an election that was a hardcore surge of men, of men who were disgruntled with the liberalizing of society, and men who want a more authoritarian form of government, more control, and less social liberalism. There's nothing she could have done to change the way those men think. Going on Joe Rogan wouldn't have helped. None of the things none of it would have changed because she is the thing that they don't want, a black woman seeking power.
I totally agree, having been on winning campaigns and losing campaigns, that when you sit there at the forums, I know maybe that's another norm that Trump has killed, but you used to go with both sides and sit there, and the campaign that won would get all the accolades, and the campaign that lost would have to sort of confess to all their sins. And the truth is usually somewhere in between, right? There's often something structural afoot. And it seems, and again, I'm in the early stages of trying to learn myself from what was told, but it seems that there may be some insurmountable perception and reality of economic rage that was beyond people's personal household strain and stress and agony of the price of things that cost their family more, but also deep despair about kids that couldn't find work, or kids that had moved back home, or neighbors that were, you know, I mean, it feels like it was widespread and potentially insurmountable.
Yeah, I think Donald Trump turned out that he knew our country better than we did. And I'm not sure I agree with a lot of what Joy said, but I think a lot of this is not the candidates, it's the country. And I think Donald Trump understood that what he could do, and I don't think his mistakes were mistakes. Mm-hmm. I think his mistakes were strategic and turned out to be right on the money, because I think our party, I grew up in a party where we were for the underdog. We were for the little guy. We are now the elite. We are no longer seen as the party for the little guy. He was seen as the party for the little guy. He was seen as the ultimate disruptor. And yes, the edges were very rough, but in everyone's own minds, they sanded them down to the point of acceptability. And as it turns out, there's a lot of craving in America for fear and anger. A lot of craving for fear and anger, driven by lies. But nonetheless, what this election result showed, especially if you look what's happened in the blue states, I mean, New Jersey turned out to be relatively close. Mm-hmm. New York, we lost huge ground. Mm-hmm. I mean, if this is not a gut check moment for the Democratic Party to realize that we need to get back to meat and potatoes and fighting like hell for the little guy. And by the way, he'll probably help us here, because I have a feeling he's going to burn the house down. I hope he doesn't. I hope he doesn't do real damage that we can't recover from. But, and you know, I got to tell you, Joy, those uncommitted folks, you know, the first call he had this morning with Bibi Netanyahu, they're going to level Gaza.
Absolutely. And the West Bank. And not only level Gaza,
and this
but
is
they're going to take over the West Bank.
It's so frustrating to me that people were seeing this as something that wasn't an existential moment in our country. Can the Democratic Party recover? Yes. Is this the end of the world? No. But if anybody thinks this is about her doing something different in her ads or not doing this, they're not paying attention. There is something fundamentally changing in America about how the Democratic Party is perceived.
Can I just say very, very quickly, though, the co-founder of Uncommitted went on our air with our friend, our dear friend Andrea Mitchell, and supported her in the end. And people from the movement were absolutely supporting her. Wajahat Ali went way out on a limb. So Palestinian rights supporters in the end, the prominent ones, the woman who was in Georgia, the state representative who was not allowed to speak at the convention, voted for her and endorsed her. So it was not the Uncommitted movement writ large, but there was enough damage already done. And remember, you had Tiffany Trump's husband, who is Lebanese American, lobbying in Dearborn to try to pull Arab and Muslim American voters. But in the end, you definitely had a push toward her at the end. It just wasn't enough. So
right.
I wanted to throw that out.
Before we go to the event, John Helman, and if I interrupt you again, I apologize. No. You've got an ear to the ground to the folks who study data for a living, and I feel like you were getting some of the most sort of on edge gut checks in the hours before the election, the conversation you and I had Monday afternoon.